we're trying to negotiate the schedule, but then we got into a side conversation about Anagora and Flancia, which is actually Flancia is more a wiki-like than a Roam-like, I'm remembering. But
what's the difference between a wiki like and a Roam like?
Wiki is free text. That's worth going over. The basic idea of Wiki is that you could use a special syntax. At the time, it was camel case words. Now it's become brackets with MediaWiki. But the original Wiki was a camel case as the wiki word. And the moment you use a wiki word in a page, it becomes a link to a new page, which doesn't exist yet. And then you can create it and fill it. So it was a very easy way. Wiki means quick. So it was a very easy way to create a site. You just edit your page, and then you add a wiki word and it becomes a link to a new page. And I'm pretty sure Anagora is based on that principle. You just put words in bracket and double square brackets, and you have a new page. Now, I'm not sure I understand fully their pull push operation. I thought at first it would be more version control type, but the way you described it, it doesn't seem to match.
No, it's more like transclusion, the concept of bringing some other node into your current nodes. You can view them all at once.
Now, Roam,
sorry, no, go ahead.
No, that's where, no, but so maybe it is a Roam-like after all. Roam is, in a way, it's like a wiki because of the easy link system, but each page has to be in outline mode. In each outline element or outline listicle, if you will, outline with its children and descendants, has an identity. So it's very easy to transclude Roam subtree because it's a tree structure. Each page is a tree structure, so you have easy transclusion of subtrees. Otherwise, you can have subtree references, you can have backlinks. Roam has backlinks, and each block type, there's each I'm saying listicle, but it's one block type. Like the outline is the default block type, but then of course you can have image or other block types. So it's very easy to have multiple block types, each with their own logic. So that's the other interesting thing about Roam.
So if I think I understand correctly, I mean, one big distinction is that Wiki is page oriented and Roam is more block or tree node oriented. Like you can identify individual. Yeah, and I don't know if what's the case for Anagora or the Agora.
Well, since you say transclusion, that means it probably has a hierarchical organization closer to a Roam-like.
Well, but I know you can transclude an entire page, but I don't know if you could transclude sub-elements of the page.
Yeah, that's the real question. And really, it's always been, sorry, this is related. I want to relate that to our grand thing, right? Wiki is about giving one page per concept. And same with Roam, it's one page per one concept per block. And the reality is whenever you explain a concept, you refer to other concepts, which is fine, those are links. But sometimes you want to refer to links between concepts. And this is where the wiki metaphor fails in my mind from an argumentation point of view, because there's no materialization of links. In a Roam-like, you can kind of do it by saying, hey, the head of the block is the link, and I have block references in the children. So you can very much do even a hypergraph up to a point, a recursive hypergraph up to a point in a Roam. I don't think it's used that way that much. Jury does that. Jury Lagos, who has been in this group one or twice maybe, or is in a lot of other groups I'm part of. He's doing a Roam-like where each block begins with, here's the role of this entity in the relation above. So it's very much topic map influence that way, because you have kind of relation and then role, actor, role entity, role entity, role entity. But he has for him, the unit of identity is the combination of role and entity name, which I would not agree with. So it's a very, very different view on topic maps. But the notion of what is the entity of the concept? What happens when you have two people talking about the same concept? Like, for example, FedWiki's solution was to have each person controls a mini wiki, and they can have their own page, or everybody has their own page for a concept, but it's very easy for me to pull your page about this concept, or even a paragraph from your page about this concept. The paragraph is the unit, or again, there's blocks there. And the beauty is that this paragraph remembers provenance. So if I look at your page history, I know all the paragraphs came from all these other things, all other pages, which may have been about the same concept or another one. But in all of those, the concept and the title of the page are identified. It's very hard to vary the granularity other than page-like. And Roam allows finer granularity, which is good. I don't think Roam has their collaborative work story well defined, however, and that's something Wiki does really well. So sorry, this is a bit of a large parenthesis, but when we want to present concepts and arguments, we have to think about this. What's the granularity of what we present? And is it sentence? Like, I very much believe that concepts live. You need the kind of page paragraph level to give a kind of coherent overview of how a bunch of concepts live together. And then you need to show the concepts within that, because no concept can be defined except with respect to surrounding concepts, almost by definition. That's and that's the theory of concept coherence I spoke about last time, which I didn't get back into. I should. So, sorry.
I'm happy to share that diagram in chat.
Go ahead.
Huh? Okay. Because I was realizing it then.
Unless others have other topics.
Is there something else someone wanted to chat about? Because I think maybe it would be useful, or like what occurred to me, about last time is that this distinction between appearance and justification. Stephen in the chat, in Slack very much picked up on, the question of, is it necessary? And so I did a little more thinking about it. Does everyone kind of forget who was here last time, but is everyone?
I wasn't. Can you give a quick summary, please?
Oh, okay, yeah. So in this diagram, maybe start with this proposition. This is the sort of main, what Marc-Antoine last time called the posit, sort of the logical content that we're talking about here. The price of gas will increase throughout 2022. You can argue, is that a good proposition? Could it be more precise? Could it be more, whatever, reworded? But and then the idea here is that all these other relations are different ways that sources and maybe media are discussing it. So here there is a research paper, we'll say, by Professor Z, and the system, like Howdju, the system that I've been prototyping, say would reference that. So this is not in the system. This is supposed to be an external, thing, an external source, and that's why it's in this web browser. But this source excerpt concept would point to it through a location. And then what I think what's interesting, maybe talk about today, is the way that this source excerpt, which is, I think, kind of like a media fragment that this group might have talked about before. How does this relate to a proposition? And what I guess these are kind of run together. Let me kind of pull this one up. I'm still of the opinion that there's at least two ways. I'm only aware of two ways that I'm interested in. Two ways to relate a proposition to like some media content. And let's talk about the two of them. So one of them is an appearance, and what an appearance is supposed to represent is that some user thinks that a person reading this, it is a reasonable interpretation for them to say, okay, this run of text, prices will increase, that logically corresponds to some proposition, which is supposed to be kind of like a standalone claim. And I guess I hesitate to say that because there's so much, so much weight, so much included in the concept of standalone claim. I think I have a pretty similar, oops, not this one. I think I have a similar definition to this group, but what I'm calling a proposition, and which I think this group is called the standalone claim, is basically concise, neutral point of view, unambiguous, declarative sentences. And we could
We're
jump into
missing
the
self-contained as much as possible, but yes.
Yeah, the context has been removed, and it's everything you need to describe it is part of it. It's all there.
okay. I'll have to think why it didn't occur to me. Maybe it's just a total oversight. Thank you.
The point being essentially that you can just look at that phrase and start debating the thing without having to ask, well, what did they mean by it? Where did it come from? And all that.
Right. Yeah, no, that definitely sounds right. Okay, so appearance is that's the person just capturing that they think that's a reasonable, basically, reading of this, this text in the wild, or this, picture in the wild, whatever it is, this media. Whereas a justification is where a person says, it's sort of like a different stance or a different mindset. The person says, oh, this thing I found is of evidentiary value, and I want it to prove some proposition. And I could stop there, and I think people can realize, like, okay, well, are those the same? Are they different? I started doing some reading, like something I've read here. I'll just say one last thing about what I was saying. I started reading again last night this SIL. I forget what it stands for. It's this linguistics. I don't think I have the link up anymore. It's this linguistics. Oh no, there it is. This linguistics glossary. And I think, to me, and I am by no means, a linguist, but if you look into mood and modality and all these different ways that either languages through their constructs, or languages even sometimes through their grammars, create different concepts around what is the speaker's stance towards some information, what is the speaker's interpretation of the source. That's what I think I'm trying to capture in this difference. So there's certain things that I'm almost not sorry. There's certain things that I want to talk about, like controversial subjects, but I don't want my username associated with saying that one justifies another. Like, I'm fine saying, hey, I think this is what is said here, but I wouldn't want to say, oh, this thing proves that, because frankly, I'm just not sure if it does. And two, I kind of don't want to be out there having said certain controversial things, even though I'd like to talk about them. All right, so now I'm done.
Okay, yeah, that last point, I'm not quite grasping it, so I'll have to think through it. But what I was going to say is, when you use the key word there, which is what we have used a bunch when discussing this sort of thing, which is interpretation, right? So what you're calling appearance here, like, in other words, there's this standalone proposition, and here's one place it shows up in the text, right? We have called an interpretation, which is that this source here can be interpreted as this proposition. The idea being that it's not a one-to-one, a source excerpt to a proposition. What you're going to have is a source excerpt or fragment, and possibly multiple propositions, all of which are somebody's interpretation of that fragment, where it's this, I think this should be interpreted as that. And the interpretation itself is essentially its own claim or its own proposition, which means it is also debatable. So then you could have a debate about why one should be the proper interpretation over the other.
Right.
Maybe either Marc-Antoine, your turn, or if you want to kind of help me understand a little bit better again the justification, because like, I usually don't think in terms of user desires and being associated or not, because my view of the CD is everything's kind of anonymous, who's doing what.
Right.
And that's why I heard is one possibly important difference between, I don't know who here's on the anonymous versus non-anonymous side, but
it's a good question, because I'm trying to model the same thing, and I'll show you my diagram where I'm at, and it's pretty close in some ways. But the whole question of negation, right? Do we have, if I say, let's take your example, price of gas will increase, price of gas will not increase. Those are two opposite statements. And hello.
They're not opposite statements. This is one of the subtleties of negation, right? The price of gas will increase is false is the negation, because where does the price of gas will stay the same fit into this when you're talking negation? Will
No,
not
no,
increase is not the opposite of will increase in that sense.
Isn't it will
it's
not
the
increase?
negation. It's the negation. You're right. It's not the opposite. The opposite is will decrease.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah.
But yeah, the negation. I mean, I did mean the negation, and thanks for catching that, Tim. Now the question is, if we have, you know, the mood, the how the person reacts to a given statement. I think this is true. I think this is false. In the appearance, which is also what I'm doing. Then how does that interact with negation? If I have two statements, the price of gas will increase, and let's assume that it's made standalone enough by, you know, by at least so much percent in so much time in this region, and all the caveats to make it a precise, predictable statement, which, by the way, the abstract one also makes sense, but the
Right. I don't think you need to add more. What do you call it? You don't need to make it more specific to make it standalone. I think you can.
That's correct.
Right
You need to make it specific to make it. I don't like the word actionable, but you know.
Useful. We've talked about this, or I say solvable, right? we haven't come up with this definition yet, but anyway.
No, we haven't.
Can you? So hey, Stephen just joined. Stephen, I was trying to dig into I don't know what the right word is, but you know, the conversation that you and I had over text or chat, you know, Slack, about, you know, the value of appearance versus justification. I'll recap if people don't mind, just for Stephen. So, you know, I was trying to I was thinking more about it after our conversation, and I think, to me, it encodes the user's stance towards the information. So I mean, an appearance is a user thinks that this is, you know, as Tim pointed out, this is like an interpretation of this media. You know, this media I interpret it as representing this standalone claim, or what I tend to call proposition, versus with a justification, a person, I think, has a stronger stance to it as being truthful and having some importance, like some significance logically. Like, not only do I find this to be, you know, true, but also I see this important conclusion that I can draw from it. So I don't know if that distinction makes sense, but I mean, let's say I'm an opposing researcher to Professor Z, and I don't think, you know, prices will increase. Well, then I may not want to justify a proposition that prices of gas will increase throughout 2022 from Professor Z's statement. Instead, I want to just capture that that's what I think Professor Z is saying, and then maybe argue about it. Whereas if I'm, I don't know, a journalist or I don't know, support,
I certainly, okay.
I just want to make sure that the distinction, at least that I'm trying to draw between the two, is clear. Sounds like people have a lot to say about
appearance, and I think that's what I also wrote in Slack, and it's very similar to what we had on the glossary at some point. I forgot what we labeled it, but indeed, interpretation is key there. If you would frame appearance as a claim, it would be the text fragment in source X, and then we have all different options: can be, should be, can possibly be interpreted as Y, like, and then that's a standalone claim. My only concern was, why do you need justification if you already have supporting relations in between standalone claims? Because then what justification is you agree with an appearance. You agree that a certain text represents a certain proposition in your terminology here. And secondary, you agree that that proposition supports another proposition.
So when I was
not...
Okay, I'll just real quick to respond to Stephen. When I was prototyping this, I initially I initially made it where my first step for capturing something was that I wanted to justify something else was interpret it with a proposition, or, you know, whatever, paraphrase it, and then make the justification. I found it to be cumbersome, because frequently I was paraphrasing the text almost verbatim to the, you know, to the claim, the standalone claim, and then making an inference. And in addition to the fact that I would like to have identity in the system, I'm also interested in practicality. So if a person on a mobile device, you know, needs to go through a cumbersome process, when that process often could be skipped, because it would be clear enough to whoever's reading it that, this is, that it wouldn't be useless to a person reading it to see, oh, this text, same text over here, now it proves this thing. Now, that's not to say a system should not support, say, hey, what did you mean here? I think it means this, and it's false for this reason. But that could be like a refinement or an additional process over the top of grabbing some text and proving something with it.
Okay, sorry, Tim, but I never got to finish my first intervention. Okay, first, I think this putting all the belief, like I believe this is true, I believe this is false, I don't know, this is a good question, this is plausible. Like, how do you stand? And in a way, I'm glad you brought up the mood, because it is very much what it's about. Putting the belief in the justification, I think it's a distinct thing. I think belief is implicit in the appearance. When I have an appearance, well, an appearance has a source, right? You're saying this proposition can be found in this text. You have a source excerpt. And then there's another question, which is this proposition as found in this text, is it being assertive, argued for, argued against, denied, blah, blah, blah. Whether or not there's a justification is another layer. For me, it's a very distinct layer. It's about saying, I think this is true. There's no justification. I think this is true. Or, I'm just asserting the prices will increase, not based on these conditions. I'm just saying the prices will increase. So obviously, Professor Z believes that is true. The fact that he moreover justifies it is a separate entity. So putting the polarity in the justification, the reality is you even if there's no justification, you need polarity in the appearance.
Well, so make sure just a few clear things. So this model, this diagram doesn't capture Professor Z's argument. I have thought some about this, where you could have justification appearances. You could say, okay, Professor Z is making this argument, Professor Z is concluding this proposition based upon this justification, but that's not represented here. So this stuff is all about the user's mentality, not about Professor Z's.
What I'm saying is, well, sorry, I'm going from your diagram because that's what I have in front of me. But what I'm saying is, if you have a sentence like, based on these conditions, I, Professor Z, predict that prices will increase, you really have three claims there, three appearances. You have the claim that I believe these conditions avail. I believe, and there can be many claims in there, I believe prices will increase, and I believe those are connected. So there's three separate claims, each of which could exist independently and have a polarity in that appearance. Like, if I just say the prices will increase, that's an appearance of that proposition. And if I say the prices will not increase, it's also an appearance of that proposition with a distinct polarity. I believe, I don't believe, I believe, I don't believe. Then you have the whole thing about the justification. And I agree, and there is a polarity in the justification, which is, I believe that this makes this more likely. I believe this makes this less likely. But you need a polarity at the appearance level, is what I'm trying to say.
Can I suggest we try to focus on the distinction between appearance and justification, just unless it's necessary to look at the polarity question. But the only reason I suggest that is that, I think there is a lot to be said about, how to model, how to handle negations. Stephen has a good prototype of having like the flip, negation there in Socrates. But if possible, I think it'd be useful. I would like to focus on just these two, since there was
what I'm trying to do.
If that's what you're trying to do. So why does it need, Tim, is what you need, do you want to respond, or it would be more helpful if I responded directly, or what?
I'm not responding to Marc-Antoine's. I have.
You mind if I
thoughts on this? Go ahead.
Go that way.
Okay.
I just don't understand the need for the polarity of an appearance, because in my thinking, the proposition, the price of gas will not increase throughout 2022, does not appear in this text. It just doesn't. I mean, it's saying the opposite. Now, a person might
I think that's what Marc-Antoine refers to as polarity, if I'm not mistaken.
You're correct.
What I'm saying is,
so I think if I understood correctly, Marc-Antoine is implying that when you an appearance should have the polarity in the sense that you make a claim that the author intended and believes in that claim that you're linking that proposition to.
Let's take okay, forget the prices of gas will not increase. Suppose I have a text saying, according to Professor Z, the price of gas will increase throughout 2022, period. This is ridiculous because blah, blah, blah. So obviously the author, the appearance of that sentence, it's the same text. It's not the negated text. It's the thing appears quoted in that different document, but it is not believed by the author of the document. So it is not, you want to say that this appearance of that statement in that document does not imply belief, as opposed to this other appearance of that exact same statement in the original document of Professor Z, where it does imply belief.
That example makes sense, but I would just
restrict appearance to the case where you imply belief, because that's the relevant use case.
No,
Yeah,
and there I disagree.
You can create relations between the propositions. Then you can say, yeah, I agree with Stephen that you should just limit it to implying or imply. I don't want to say implies belief. So this is another nuance, is that just because one user thinks that a proposition appears in the text, that doesn't mean that the author believes that. There is also the argument around like actual statement. What could a person reasonably believe the person was trying to say? And I'm trying to think of a good example. This comes up a lot.
I have an answer to that, which I think is extremely easy and important. Sorry.
Comes
Tim.
a lot with controversial subjects. Like someone will say something and they're like, well, no, I couldn't have possibly meant that offensive thing because all that I said was this. Like, well, no.
But that's different. That's different. I think, don't think of the I believe, I don't believe as the key case. For me, the key case is posing a question as a hypothesis. This might be, let's investigate. In the scientific paper, it's like, we're looking whether price gas will increase. And then this is not a statement of belief or disbelief, but it's definitely one whose appearance is important. Because for example, I may be saying, if price gas increase, blah, blah, blah. So I'm doing a consequence statement, ultra important to record. Same thing, if blah, 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 this, then gas will increase. I'm not committing to the if. Again, the link is super important. We want to record it. There's an appearance. Okay, it's not about belief or disbelief, but about belief or non-belief. Yeah, is a very important distinction of appearances. Over.
But the question is really, is that an appearance, or that you, Kyle, because this is your diagram, intended to be more narrowly defined? Because we just need to decide what it is in this diagram and then move on from there.
So my understanding of what Marc-Antoine just said is that if someone who correctly understood that writing in that paper would not make the mistake of thinking that the hypothetical corresponded to the actual belief. So I mean, in that sense, I would agree with you, Marc-Antoine. Yeah, I mean, the belief of the author, or that what's written in the context around a run of text is important. Like if it's part of hypothetical, that shouldn't be taken as a appearance,
an assertion, a claim, an asserted claim.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But and someone might maliciously or accidentally just select a narrow bit of text and put it as in a proposition, and then another user might say, oh, interesting, and I thought I read that paper and I don't remember them saying that. They go back and they look in and they say, oh, no, they're missing the hypothetical that precedes it. And then they go into the appearance, and just this is, like Tim was saying, this is an actual thing that is capable of justification. It can have pros and cons, like this does or does not appear here, and they could put in a con justification saying this proposition does not appear here because the author or the quote omits the hypothetical immediately preceding it, as evidenced by this source excerpt from the exact same paper, which is a little bit longer and has the if preceding it.
So what I'm saying is whether there's belief must be a property of the appearance. Over, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, what I see here is that you're seeing one use case and you're trying to shortcut to facilitate the use case. You're trying to make one very specific use case easier within the model when it's really more of a user concern. Why do I say one use case? It's because there are a lot of debates you can have about any fragment, any excerpt, right? And we've gone over this with evidence as well, where okay, does the author believe this? Okay, was this the original text? Is this, there's provenance, there's, how significant is this within the context? There's all sorts of debates you can have and many different things you can talk about a fragment. But if you're trying to say, for example, the actual claim you may be trying to make here is, the author said this, which supports this other proposition, right? Or you could be debating about what the author actually believes, or you could be debating about something, but each one of these is a separate proposition, is a separate claim. And each one of those can have multiple justifications beyond the fact it appears in that one text. For example, you may want to say, oh, the author definitely believes this because in a separate text they said this thing. And so that claim of what the author believes is itself a proposition that needs the full structure of debate. And once you solve that, the proposition should support or negate the other proposition. Because author believed this, therefore this other thing is true. So, you know,
What's an example of
would,
the other thing? Do you mean like taking this proposition and proving a third thing? Like what? I missed that last part.
well, so I mean, what is the justification example here? Justification.
The justification,
give me an example of using.
Like some undergrad student is writing a research paper and they read this research paper by Professor Z and they see this and they're like, oh, you know, my professor talked about Professor Z. This person's highly credible. I'm sure they're right about the oil prices.
Exactly. So it's like an argument by authority.
That,
right.
yeah, they probably view it as authoritative.
The document there. You can just say, my professor thinks that. Right, that's a proposition. My professor thinks that, therefore that thing is more likely to be true. And then you debate it by supporting it with, here is an example of a paper where he said this, and you can debate whether he said that in the paper. And you could debate that by, here's a recording of him in one of our classes where he said this explicitly, and so on. But the point is that the professor believed that, and therefore the thing is more likely to be true. Right. So it's not like you're trying to shortcut things by taking one fragment and using it as the proof that somebody believed that and so on. But actually, it's a separate proposition.
I'm not okay. So for one, thank you. I mean, that's really, I'm enjoying this conversation a lot. But I think that's just one side of this diagram was, you know, this particular, you know, media and what, you know, with their appearance or justification. But there is this statement over here. Now, I will agree with you that I'm not trying to capture these people, these purse orgs belief. I guess I haven't really thought about it other than I don't know that it's gonna be very fruitful to try and figure out what did someone believe, but I am trying to capture statements. So I think this is what you're talking about, like an independent, you know, entity that is about, you know, Professor X said that the price of gas will increase. And this is separate from this particular source excerpt. It's particular, you know, different from its usage. It's, you know, was it said at all? And there could be all kinds of justifications for this. You know, for example, this other news article that reports on Professor Z, and you know, this contrived example, you know, this article was intended to sort of correspond to this research, but you can imagine other things over here which have nothing to do with that. You know, it could be I met Professor Z at a cocktail party. And well, I shouldn't say you know, Carl Gehringer met Professor Z at a cocktail party on such and such date and such location, wherein, you know, Professor Z said that such and such is the case. And that justifies that Professor Z said that prices of gas will increase throughout 2022. Like that would be one use case over here with statements. And that's, I think, you know, I don't know if Steve is backing up with you and me, but that's why I think statements do need to be separate from just these appearances and justifications. I guess that didn't come so much up in our conversation. I was trying to figure out if statements were necessary, and I think they do need to exist independently.
I would just respond to that by saying what you're doing is you're taking one set of use cases and building around that set of use cases, but it's a subset of a larger issue, which I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. We've never got around to, which is evidence, right? What you're trying to do is use external evidence to prove a proposition. And in this case, it's, you know, that a professor believes something, and because the professor believes something, it is true or more likely to be true. But there are lots of kinds of evidence. I mean, I guess we try to encapsulate it all within fragment. But yeah, I would say we should discuss it maybe in the larger context rather than focus specifically on a statement that somebody said.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to make this very targeted for conversation, but yeah, I definitely would love to hear where this might be missing use case abilities.
Well, the nice thing about having a different concrete form for statements would be that you can actually at some point extract the statement from the professor. If the professor is a user of the platform, you can actually get that confirmation on a certain proposition, which they're expressing belief in a certain proposition is in fact the same as that statement.
Yeah.
First, apologies, I misunderstood justifications. I thought they were arguments. And so a lot of what I said was not exactly relevant, though I still think it is relevant, but I'll need to argue it differently. If we go back to my example of somebody saying, like you have your example of Professor Z, based on these conditions, I believe the prices would increase. That's a positive appearance. And somebody else in a totally different paper saying, or it could be even Professor Z, I think that the increase of price of oil would have this economic impact, which does not assert the premise. Now, that's a different appearance where it's a hypothetical. And what I'm saying is one can be used as a justification and not the other, obviously. And so what I'm saying is the ability to be used as a justification has to be part of the appearance property, because it's a bit absurd to separate it in the, or I don't see the point personally of separating it in the justification. What's happening in the justification is somebody is using an appearance, which happens to be an actual assertion and not a hypothetical, to bolster belief in something. And that's, I don't see the point of separating it, but I'm not against it. I can see the point of saying here, the appearance is quoted. I don't know if I believe in Professor Z, but here I'm saying, I personally think that this appearance is proper evidence. And that's a statement. You're saying, I believe that this appearance that Professor Z believes in it is actually a valid, it actually does make it more likely. Whereas it's clear that nobody could ever argue that the first like convincingly, that the second appearance could ever be a justification. So I'm saying there's something that belongs in the appearance about whether it is a statement of fact or a hypothetical or even a counterfactual. These are distinct cases, and I think they need to be distinguished at the appearance level because they enable or don't enable justification. Like somebody saying, yes, I believe that this appearance that Professor Z saying it is germane to the likelihood of it actually happening. Over. Oh, and I have my own diagram that I'd like to present, but I should let Tim speak here.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I raised my hand for something completely different, and I just forgot it.
Oh,
it was gonna like add an extra thing onto this discussion, and I totally forgot. So, but I'll just use this thing to state, kind of another way of putting it is your justification line there. When I say it's a shortcut, what it is, it's a very specific claim or proposition that says the fact that this phrase appears in that document implies that X person supports this proposition, right? So in other words, it's a very wordy, very specific proposition to be debating that has all been shortcut by one box.
Well, no, so this one, it's just called implied justification, but you can imagine this is a real justification here. That's this one down here. This one is saying this appearance or this, text in this source implies that Professor X said that. So that's this one down here. This one, it is shortcutting, and that's why I was trying to jump to use cases. I am trying to come up with a tool that remains usable and pragmatic.
But I think when you're
Well-
looking at use cases that you want to make easier to do,
Uh-huh.
it's a lot better to keep the model as simple, because you're going to see these special shortcutting boxes that are common use cases multiply. The more people use it, the more things you want to make easier and shortcut, you're just going to multiply. And really, they're just redundant for very specific kinds of propositions. Whereas if you just in the on the web form, on the mobile app, when they hit that button underneath, you create the propositions hard-coded to doing those things. You get the usability, but you've kept the underlying model simple and as flexible as the standard model is, right? The standard model is
so
more
you're
flexible.
arguing for unpacking this. You're saying this should be unpacked to everything that's implicit in it, that, you know, Professor Z said this, Professor Z is credible.
Yes,
I guess that's it.
exactly,
probably.
because each of those are separately debatable as well, right? Whether or not they're credible, whether or not you know, they may have changed their mind over time, whether or not, you know, there's so many different arguments people can bring up, and I just can't see a way to do that without a lot of.
I just think it's a lot of burdensome overhead. You know, like so many.
I did remember the other thing. Let me say the other thing that's a side thing, but I think it's important to think about with regards to statements and who said what and that sort of thing. You might want to look at a project called Underlay. I haven't looked at it in over a year. There's a project called the Underlay that, like, the original creator of the original Google knowledge base or whatever is doing it. They are looking at creating a truth database, and since so much is up to interpretation, so much is up to value judgments and whatever, they're like, you know, what is the one thing that we can actually prove as being true? And that thing to them is X person said Y. So they're just collecting everything that everybody said in any context, and that's their database of, yes, this person said that, this person said another thing, and this person, and kind of relating them together in a knowledge base. And they don't even want to take on, you know, whether or not these things are true, or whether they were trustworthy, or you could trust that that person meant that or whatever. They're like, we leave that to a second trust layer on top. But underneath, they are focusing on capturing what everybody has ever said, at least in media and literature.
It's very much the CDL plus provenance. I mean, I'm a big fan of what they're doing. Technically, I have issues, but conceptually, I think they're very close.
Like I would think of it in terms of the CDL as a hopefully reliable resource for evidence with provenance, right? And this is why I want to talk about evidence. It's a type of evidence, right, with some provenance to prove it, and provenance is going to be important to evidence, right? Any piece of evidence, to believe the evidence, you have to prove provenance, right? But anyway, yeah, it's an interesting case, especially for capturing this kind of thing.
Just, yes, oh no, it wasn't there? No, Underlay is really to be looked at in great detail. It's extremely important. I'd be willing to spend time on talking about it because it's very RDF based. So I'd be very happy to spend time on the Underlay. Just quickly, I'll take over the screen. Yeah, sure, full desktop. And I want to show this. Share. No, stop that. Minimize this. So this is not final, but it's work in progress of what I've been doing with Jack, because he's been trying to have a topic map database. And the way I did it with him, this is really, it is a yard diagram because this is going to be a Postgres thing. It's not final for me, for reasons I'll get into. But let's first look at what I have. I have documents, there's text fragments in document. This is slightly recursive because paragraph, sentence, phrase will be fragment types. I'm calling it occurrence here instead of phrase for reasons to come. Start and content. And here's the wordgram is the phrase really. And there is my usual many-to-many relation between a phrase and a topic. And there's a label, which is the preferred, and maybe I'll have the preferred negative and preferred positive. We'll get, I'm still thinking about that. But the topic is kind of the concept or I'm liking, by the way, you're using the term proposition, Carl. Maybe I will use proposition sometimes, but here topic also includes entities, so they're not all propositions.
What is wordgram?
Wordgram it's a phrase really, but here it's a kind of phrase metadata. So we can say this fragment here, that's kind of the occurrence. That would be Okay, in a way, this thing was found, this set of words was found in this document, and then we create a word gram for it. And if it comes often enough, then we'll start thinking, okay, maybe we need a concept for that phrase. Or maybe we'll see, you know what, this word gram probably has the same meaning as this other topic, as this existing topic, which already has a label. So the classic example, CO2, carbon dioxide. CO2 comes a few times and we're like, oh, okay, we need to worry about what it means because it's come up often enough. And so
wait, you have word gram as one-to-one with topic.
No, I have word gram as many to many with true topic name.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I have many to one. Many
oh, that's
to one,
your preferred, like
the preferred word gram.
Yeah, okay.
The preferred label here. That's the one-to-one part. The castings are how to do the hypergraph parts, so relation, role, actor. But what I really wanted to focus on here is the topic occurrence. The notion that, hey, this topic, irregardless of how it was expressed, what phrase was used for it, was deemed to be found in this text fragment or in this phrase. This phrase expresses this topic, if you will. And this phrase in context, not this phrase abstractly, that's the word gram, but this phrase in this document with context. And so topic, occurrence.
But is that then like
and then
a definitive interpretation? Is that like there has been a decision made about whether or not that's an interpretation, a proper interpretation?
And here we get the likelihood. Like, is it likely that it really was this topic and it's ordered, and we may have multiple concurrent topic occurrences for that phrase and ordered by likelihood? That's not good yet. There's so many things wrong about this, but I wanted to have a zero-level discussion piece. Starting point.
Can you hover over epistemic again? Is the negation?
And the epistemic is exactly what we were talking about today: asserted, negated, posited, quoted, counterfactual. I should add. I'm still working on that part. But the notion that when this topic is named in this text fragment, what is the epistemic status that is being? It's close to your mood in a way. What's the epistemic status that's asserted about this topic, whether it's a claim? I mean, for an entity, it doesn't matter. It's always just posited, right? It's posited, it exists.
But it's essentially Carl's appearance plus some extra stuff.
Exactly. Well, plus pretty important extra stuff, like what is the epistemic status? And that's what I've been arguing up all today. And yes, if
epistemic status.
So, yeah, so I see that as a claim. It's actually that's multiple mutually exclusive claims, right?
These, yeah, well, okay. Yes and no. This is the meta claims, if you will. It's the interpretation claim. It's the interpretations. This is really the interpretation. It's saying this phrase in this context is probably this topic. Most claims would live at the topic level.
Is probably this topic meant according to epistemic something.
Exactly.
No,
so
it's probably this topic meant
with the same topic and occurrence. They are competing claims. That's what Timothy is asking, right? And I think that's true.
That's true. You could have competing claims with the same topic and occurrence, but different epistemic status. That's correct. That's correct. I should make epistemic part of the key. Because you could have competition based on epistemic. Absolutely true. That's
and even likelihood.
No, because the point is, if you have many with the same, then there's a likelihood. I'm. How should I put it?
It always helps when you claim that something is a claim to phrase it as a claim, to make it clear what it is.
The problem is in my world, and this is I'm doing this with Jack, and in Jack's world, entities and claims are all topics. It's whether or not they have castings that makes them entity versus claim. They either do or don't have castings. If it has castings, it's probably a claim. If it has no casting, it's probably an entity.
What is a
description.
casting?
It's the
Oh,
roles. It's the key value pointing to other topics. Like if it's a frame,
but you could have a topic that, I mean, because any sentence is a topic that has castings, right? Doesn't have to be.
and it's probably a claim too. Okay,
No, it could be a question. We've gone. What is the word for
yeah,
something
yeah,
statement?
yeah. True. And this is where I think, and I like the way that Carl called it, proposition rather than claim. Like in a way, the claim only exists, and there you're right, both, that the claim, when you're claiming, you're saying, hey, this proposition is true, and that's at the epistemic level.
That's the same distinction I always made between statement and claim. I argued a long time ago that I prefer to call it statement. Same reason Carl is preferring to call it proposition.
Yeah, for me, statement sounds affirmative as well. So I'm really liking proposition. But yes,
proposition. It's a useful distinction to make.
It's yeah, and it's the one that this Runbeck called posit, right? I tried to introduce the term posit for the same usage.
But posit wasn't an entity level.
What do you mean?
Okay, it's been a long time since we talked about posits.
Yes, it's pretty much the same thing as proposition, or and posit abstracts on the negation, and that's kind of the question of if we have negation. Is negation the same as disbelief?
Posit
What?
and negate.
I
Well,
think for
see,
me,
the
if I
opposite of
remember
posit
posit
is-
correctly, wasn't it a breakdown of it? I would say that you can represent the proposition using posits, one or more posits.
The idea of Runbeck was to have one entity be the posit, and then he'd have, I don't know what he called it, maybe claim or assertion or whatever, which was, one was for the positive version of the posit and one was for the negative version of the posit. But they're about the same question, so they share the posit. I'm not, I'm still agnostic about whether I want to go that way or say,
But I was just pointing out that in that sense, posit is not the same as proposition. Posit is like an abstraction which you can use to represent the proposition, probably.
Well, that's the question. Is the proposition, since we agree that we separate out the epistemic status from the proposition, I think that's fine. But the question then is, should we then wrap the negation into the epistemic status or not? Or is there a value to having two opposite propositions that is not going the posit route, having two opposite propositions, and then we have to see, okay, belief in the proposition, disbelief in the proposition,
Exactly.
belief in the negation.
It's a matter of semantics. If we agree that a proposition is God exists and God does not exist is a different proposition, if that's how we talk about it, then a proposition is not a posit. And yes, you can use a posit to represent the same underlying posit, that it's both about God, and then one proposition expresses belief, the other disbelief. Just a matter of vocabulary.
No, yes, that's between posit and proposition. I agree with all that. What I'm saying is forget the posit for now. Suppose we are going with proposition, okay? And we have God is great, God is not great. Those are two opposite proposition related by an opposite relation, okay? But what I'm saying is, even for God is great, I need to have a polarity in the claim, which I'm putting in the topic of occurrence here, right? Maybe it's not the right way, but there is, whether it's an occurrence or not, we have something else, which is adding epistemic status to the proposition, saying it's believed, it's not believed, it's being quoted, it's being investigated, it's being something.
In the source. So you can't have this epistemic field without it. Well, yeah, you have the link there.
Oh, yes, correct. Well, it is source related.
Okay.
And that probably means, yeah, I think you're saying it has nothing to do with negation.
This epistemic field, no, I don't see how it's related to negation.
Okay, the reason I like posit as opposed to statement, but I'm still, there's things to not like about posit. It creates complexity elsewhere. But what I like about posit is that if I have epistemic mood, maybe I should call it mood. I am liking that, Carl. If I have the epistemic modality is really what we want. If we want the modality in the occurrence, which makes sense, it's in the source, then I don't need to have the polarity or the negation link in the proposition because it can be wrapped into the modality. But it creates other problems. So I'm floating here. But what is clear is the epistemic belongs in the occurrence. That's a fact. And I think even in the occurrence-less CDL context, it may be important to have different modalities, but I may be wrong here. This is really a question to Tim. Do you see a use case for saying there's this undecided problem? Like, is the Riemann hypothesis is a good example. It's an undecided problem in mathematics. We don't know. There are all kinds of things that can be deduced from it if it's true or if it's false. There are all these reasons to believe or disbelieve it. We'd want to have it as a statement in the CDL, but it's not as a currently unknown truth status. Now, of course, is modality something you'd want to model in the CDL, like outside of the occurrence, outside of in the source? That's a question to you.
No, I would want it to be handled by definitions. I think doing that sort of thing, essentially you're limiting a certain set of adjectives to being special. And then, it doesn't fit when you want to say, oh, they, quoted it ironically or asserted it with glee, or, there's kind of more things you can.
No, that's not what I'm speaking about.
I know. There's specific categorizations, but I think categories don't always map neatly onto reality, and so I would be really hesitant to map a theory onto special modeling.
There's clearly something which is not epistemic, but which is another form of model logic that is useful for the CDL, which is the case to I'm saying this fact make this consequence possible or makes it certain. That's not the same thing. There's a modality aspect here that we would want to capture at the CDL level.
Like you mean deduction versus induction, that kind of thing?
No, I don't know. No. I'm saying if this happens, this will certainly happen. Okay, that's the sufficient condition. But if this happens, this then could happen, whereas it couldn't happen before. So it's a necessary but not sufficient condition. So that's a modality aspect, possibility of. This makes
aren't physicists debating whether or not causality exists? I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't think we're debating.
I know, no, it would be useful, but I'm not. You'd have to be sold that any special thing. It's like going way back in formal fallacies. When I first started working with this, I was sure informal fallacies were some special category I would want to build into the system, and I realized little by little it's just another kind of claim that has to be debated and so on and so forth. And I just figured, the claims would be stated and you debate them like anything else. But I could be convinced otherwise.
I wanted to ask a question about your diagram about this concept, Marc-Antoine.
Yep.
Do you mind, Tim? You got your hand up first.
You got your physical hand up first, so go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you thought. Well, so my question, I'm trying to understand the motivation of this approach of having this epistemic concept in the appearance. And so you mentioned this example of let us investigate, whether or not is the case that the price of gas will rise or something like that. And yep. I'm just trying to understand why is it valuable to capture that sort of phrasing in a system? Is it because the person will quote, perhaps, or they'll capture the run of text, price of gas will increase. They'll indicate that it's, spoken in a hypothetical sense, or whatever, an investigative sense. Why is it even useful to capture that in a system? Is it because you want to help people find everything that's being talked about everywhere? Or and just to help understand my motivation, like I would say that's
easy answer.
You want to jump to the end and say, okay, well, what were their conclusions or their facts that help, give you any, concept of the truth or falsehood of that thing they were investigating?
Very easy answer. Suppose one person asserts, if I believe X will happen and will cause the price of gas to rise, okay? Mm-hmm. And somebody else says, I believe if gas price rises, then this other thing will happen, then the economy will collapse. And then somebody's curious about, will the economy collapse? So they want to know about, nobody made the direct link between this event. Okay, if war in Ukraine, gas of price increases, if gas of price increases, economy collapse, let's say. So nobody made the direct link between Ukraine and economy collapse, but you can find those two links. You have a complete argument chain. Even though it's hypothetical, it was important to record because you've got the links. I mean, so many times I've read mathematical proofs where we want to prove C. We don't know B, but we know that we will prove that B leads to C. So if somebody else can prove B, that's useful.
NP completeness or whatever, right?
For example.
I mean, it is about modeling more precise forms of inference.
Yeah, it's chain arguments. It's like basic syllogism, right? Syllogism is two premise, one conclusion, and if one of the premise is hypothetical.
In fact, this is something I've come across many times in practice on using debate map, because you have a complex claim, right? It's a claim of multiple claims. It's a chain of logic, right? And I have to say, like, the claim is that this thing is causing that thing, right? And so I say, I break it down and say A is happening, and then I have to put a claim in that says, if A is happening, then B will probably happen. And then therefore, so there's this kind of if-then structure that I've come across many times in breaking out essentially syllogisms or something,
I have to think about that one. But thank you for.
I guess I'll do my little thing here. This is just another side note, which is going back to our discussions 2 years ago or something, when somebody actually convinced me, changed my mind on something, which was the question of whether you model a claim and its negation as one entity, or you break them out into two separate things. And I'm still very firmly of the mind that this sort of thing should be done as separate claims with a mutually exclusive relationship. It's a special kind of mutual exclusion. But because I also see the usefulness of other kinds of mutual exclusion, and especially if you're scoring that whole thing about, likelihood, one argument that supports the likelihood of one must automatically subtract from the other. And that's the same for negations as it is for, three possibilities. A is greater than B. Well, A equals B. If you prove A equals B, you've proved, anyway, so that's
negation that way is a special case of multilemma. Fair enough.
I think.
Okay.
People are trying to wind down. Oh, sorry. I was coming back a little bit to Marc-Antoine's thing. Was someone going to say something?
Go ahead. I'm done. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, but I have nothing else to say, so go back.
I was just going to say, when I said I have to think about, this idea of the epistemic, field in an appearance, I think a lot of my thinking depends upon motivated, agents, motivated users, which is why I hadn't really thought about, trying to model, okay, someone has captured that this hypothetical, is talked about here, and now someone has, found the the premise, and so now we can conclude the conclusion, because I just assumed that enough people doing their daily life and researching information would sort of find their way to the nodes and then be able to connect them themselves. So I guess I was assuming that would be in people's heads. That's kind of, I'd have to think about it. I guess in a sense you just have to try it and see how it works with people. Maybe
in some cases they will, but for me it's clear that the whole point of doing collective intelligence at scale is for the computer to help in making people see the connections that they're otherwise missing. The whole point is there's too much information. So it's about saying, okay, this thing you're interested in, well, here's the other incoming and outgoing connections and alternatives and other things you didn't know existed. Solving the ignorance of ignorance case, at least. And yeah, having the incoming links is totally part of the, for me, part of the goals, the scope. Okay.
I guess I have one last word to say, which is, again, totally unrelated, but I am on a deep dive with epistemic attack vectors, and it is fantastic, fascinating. And I'm looking at this as actually a major value proposition. I mean, I've heard it.
I can't Google that. Do you want?
I'll send you some. Yeah. I'll send some links.
See, epistemic
but
semantics.
There's a lot of talk these days about hybrid warfare, but there's also just general epistemic security as a topic that comes up worldwide now as a problem, right? And I've been looking at, what are proposed solutions, and they're so haphazard and not well done. And I look at, here are the 5 elements of our epistemic insecurity and ways we can tackle them. And the canonical debate ticks off 5 of the 7 boxes, right? And it's like, it's so like my whole thing about why aren't people talking about this as a potential solution? I suddenly realized not only is there a world of research around this that should become more aware, which means I'm getting a list of academics who are focused on this thing and think tanks and that sort of thing that we should call out to, write a paper or call out to them or something. I'm just also hearing it in popular places, like what's his name, the old dark, what is it, the intellectual dark web guy, Sam Harris, right? Yeah, Sam Harris had Max Brooks on. Max Brooks is actually a high school friend of mine. And Max Brooks is the guy that wrote World War Z, the book. And he actually worked. Yeah, it's Mel Brooks' son. And he was on Sam Harris to talk about his job, which is he actually got hired by the US Defense Department because World War Z, even though it's a zombie apocalypse, was so much more accurate in terms of things that could happen during a pandemic and that sort of thing than what actual generals and people were putting together. It was such a realistic prediction of the sort of way society might break down under such a scenario that they have him analyzing crisis scenarios, right? And so, I actually have a personal contact of somebody who's both with the government and in pop culture who cares about it, specifically this topic of epistemic security. And that's an angle we haven't been approaching this discussion. And so when I've finished my studies, I think, I'm going to try to write at least a paper, a blog post or something, and then start reaching out to academics and to Max Brooks and to other people to see because if you're talking now about something that is national security, if you're talking about places to get some funding, you can't find a better, subject. So it's an interesting place. But anyway, it's just intellectually very fascinating. And I read so many things that are like, oh my God, like we have a solution in our hands if people would just make it happen. So that's pretty exciting for me.
Would it be useful to start collecting those and dropping those links in Slack somewhere for some? I'm not sure
I'll
why,
send
like,
you the papers I've looked at so far. Yeah.
yeah, start
and it's
maybe,
very
like linking them
yeah.
in the white paper somehow. I'm not sure. Or you said you're going to create a
I
paper.
think it'd be a separate paper that would be, you
Yeah.
know,
Very neat. I know at one of Sam's latest AMAs, I sent him a request and asked him, like, hey, can you address this in some form or another? So I think eventually he's going to point his attention towards this, which would be nice. But.
Yeah. Cool.
I agree. This is, I mean, it's a real, I think I can't remember if we talked about this for the past year, but I mean, I think that's a motivation for all of us, right? That, I mean, this is a social problem.
Yeah, I've always attacked it from the angle of like a problem that just kind of happened, as opposed to a security issue. So that's the one thing that's changed for me, is looking at it as attack vectors or vulnerabilities. And from that perspective, there's been studies on, you know, where are the points of attack, and so there are people in the military and in Russia and that sort of thing who actually use this information, these studies, to actually attack. Right? It's not theoretical. It's not I mean, I have books about how this has been done in Brazil, for example, because I have an academic friend who studies specifically what happened in Brazil. But that's the hybrid warfare approach, where there's a specific recipe you could put down to do this thing yourself, right? And part of it is creating ambiguity, and in ambiguity there's uncertainty. Uncertainty creates a hesitation for action, and in a democracy you need consensus to make decisions, and so democracies are specifically more vulnerable to ambiguity, right? And so you need to shortcut or reduce the time of ambiguity if you want to be a productive democratic society, right?
Well, this is why the inoculation approach of Taiwan has been so efficient, right? What the premier of Taiwan was doing was take on national TV, okay, there's this rumor going on before it was a big snowball, and this is why it's false, so that people will hear it from him before it had spread. And so that created,
and that seems to happen like with
framing.
Biden with Ukraine, right? That's one, you know, intelligent use of intelligence, right, was stated, was promoted, is that he actually saw this might be a type of false flag attack by Russia, and then announced it to everybody that it was coming, and that supposedly inoculated people. Part of the study that I'm looking at also is, what are the countermeasures? What is the defenses you can build for epistemic security, right? And that inoculation is probably one. Yeah,
it's clearly important. It's very
except
difficult.
the problem is populism is defined as creating a distrust, an us versus them against the elites, and the elite is the establishment, and if the establishment is the one telling you that, you know, what is the truth, we know how that goes.
And it comes back to trust, and trust has already been sabotaged for decades. Like the campaign against the elites has been an active part of US politics and the Western world to a lesser degree, but it started in the US. But the campaign against the elites as a way to create distrust and undermine democracy has been ongoing from American sources and foreign sources.
Campaign? Did you say campaign?
Oh yeah. The whole, you know, the whole, what was it Reagan said? The most scary words are, I'm from government and I'm here to help.
Yeah, that was Reagan. Yeah. That
was Reagan. Like, this is old. Like, it's been an active, relentless anti-government, anti-elite, also that's distinct, but they both exist. Anti-elite messaging that's been relentless in American media. And you know the other classic, right? The point of disinformation is not to make you believe something else, but it's to make you doubt everything. And then indeed, in democracy, you can doubt. The doubt, and this is the big paradox of, we want to foster intellectual openness because it's important for people to be less rigid about their already held disinformation beliefs. But on the other hand, openness and ability to doubt things can be toxic because it becomes a way, because it creates doubt and inaction. So I think it's extremely important to have openness nonetheless, but because we need.
Well, that's what I say about the canonical debate is we want free speech. We just need the canonical debate or something like it to remove the harmful effects of free speech. Right?
In that way, I totally defend the canonical debate objective as a form of inoculation database, right? It's if you have a term, go to the canonical debate and you'll see the counter arguments. But
Exactly.
we
About
have to be.
centralization, indeed, right? I mean, it's about you want everyone to be able to say what they want, but you want to centralize what everyone says about similar things in one place, so you get an overview, and you can still make up your mind. And if you want to go one step further, like you intend to do, Marc-Antoine, you can also like model inference, etc.
Yeah,
but I have to. Sorry, I have to go because my meeting started.
Okay, but
so
just quickly,
I gotta go.
But CDL will be attacked. Will also be a vector of attack, and that's the
which is why which is like why in the white paper I go through all the ways of maintaining trust in the CDL, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. See you soon.
See you.
Thanks a lot.